this now because silence has already done enough damage. People should know how far the evil spread and the madness behind it. The Whitmore case was where it began. That was the first time I heard of M. 3 years ago, an old friend from the police, Arthur Bell, called me to a house beyond the town in the middle of a hard rain. Edward Whitmore had been found dead in his locked study. The official conclusion was simple: weak heart, failed medicine, natural death. Bell had known Whitmore for years and did not believe he had died honestly. Neither did I, for that matter. It was the kind of instinct I had acquired after leaving the police a long time ago. Since then, I had worked as a private investigator, looking into deaths that seemed too neat. This was one of those times. Rook was with me, as always. He noticed the house before I did. As we turned into the Whitmore lane, he rose in the passenger seat and fixed his eyes on the upper windows, while rain slid down the glass in long silver seams. The Whitmore house stood alone, large without warmth, expensive without generosity. Arthur met me at the door and stayed with me through the investigation, though by then the body had already been removed, which I disliked at once. A room changes after the dead have been taken away. Clara Whitmore led us to the study. She was elegant, composed, controlled. The room was small, orderly, and much too eager to explain itself. Papers sat in neat stacks on the desk. A glass of brandy stood near the lamp, poured and untouched. Beside it rested a blue medicine bottle with the cap off. A chair near the desk lay overturned, and that was the first thing in the room I distrusted. Not because it looked dramatic, but because it looked imagined. A naturally overturned chair has a certain ugliness to it, a small, honest chaos. This one looked arranged. There had been 4 people in the house that evening, not counting servants. Whitmore, dead. Clara, composed. Daniel, the son, trying too hard to seem steady. And Dr. Simon Vale, the family physician. Daniel had argued with his father shortly before the death. He was a spender, lazy, drowning in vice and debt, and he had learned that afternoon that Whitmore intended to change his will and cut him out. Vale was the other obvious suspect. He knew the medicine, the weak body, the narrow bridge between discomfort and death. But neither man interested me as much as the bottle on the desk. Then Rook nosed his way under the desk and stopped at the shadowed inner side of one pedestal, where something small had lodged beneath the lip of the wood. It was the kind of place a policeman in a hurry would never inspect closely because the room already appeared to make sense. I bent down and worked free a crushed white fragment no larger than a thumbnail. Beneath the lamp, it looked like part of a tablet. I raised it to my nose. Peppermint. That was wrong. I took the medicine bottle from the table and pulled out a real tablet. I broke it in half and smelled it. Chalky, bitter, medicinal, but with a faded trace of peppermint still clinging to the bottle. That was the moment the room changed shape. Whitmore had not died because he failed to reach his medicine. He had died because what he reached for was no medicine at all. The medicine had been switched with peppermints before he entered the study, and switched back after the body was discovered. Once that became clear, the locked door lost its magic. Nothing needed to happen inside the room except Whitmore's own panic. The real act had taken place earlier, quietly, in the dull domestic hour when no one expects murder. Daniel had motive, but not the patience. Vale had knowledge, but the act itself did not feel medical. It felt intimate. The quarrel with Daniel, too, had begun to look less like chaos than preparation. It was Clara who had told him his father meant to cut him from the will. Clara who had placed the idea before him. Clara who had set father and son against each other so that Whitmore would enter the study already inflamed in body and mind. What remained was the bridge between her and the false tablets. I found them among her private things, in the drawer of a narrow table by the window in her room, kept in the same careful order as everything else in that house. I held one of the sweets beside the fragment from under the desk, and saw at once that it belonged to the same deception. She had shaped them there, in private, then carried them to the study and trusted the room to do the rest. When I laid the real tablet beside the false fragment and explained the thing plainly, Clara listened without interruption. Then she laughed, not loudly, not wildly, but with a quiet relief that changed the whole meaning of her face. She admitted she had replaced the tablets, but when I asked why, she said this had only been her part. Her part, not her reason, not even her choice. Her part. She crossed to a writing cabinet and produced an envelope of heavy cream paper. Inside was a typed letter containing precise instructions. Whitmore's sickness, the study, the tablets, Daniel's anger described as useful pressure. At the bottom there was only an initial, M. But it was the reverse side of the letter that mattered most. On it was a message for whoever eventually found the truth. Congratulations. And a confession that this was not the first death arranged by M, nor the last. But now, someone had noticed him, and the game might become more interesting. I asked Clara who M was. She told me she had never seen his face because he had no face. Clara spoke of him with something far worse than fear: devotion, admiration. It was clear this persuasion had begun long before Whitmore died. M had reached into her life, into her bitterness, into whatever private wound made obedience feel like purpose, and built this murder from the inside. Arthur took Clara and the letter back to the station. Officially, the case was solved. But when Rook and I left the house shortly after midnight, I knew I had not merely uncovered a killer. What I had really found was a method, a mind that preferred arrangement to action. Someone who could enter a room without stepping inside it and commit a crime without ever touching the body. That was the first time I saw the initial, the first time I held one of his letters, the first time I heard of M. The next day I learned that Clara Whitmore had taken her own life in custody. Whatever she knew about M died with her. By then, I understood that M would prove far more clever and far more dangerous than any man I had ever met. But I could never imagine how far it would go. My name is John Harlowe. This was my first record.